The foundation cracked beneath her feet long before the bruises bloomed purple across her ribs. Zara Williams pressed concealer over the fingerprint marks on her throat, her hands trembling as she worked to erase the evidence of Marcus's latest rage. The bathroom mirror reflected a stranger's face, hollowed and painted with lies. Her phone buzzed against the counter. Another text from Marcus. Another promise that he would find her wherever she ran. The words blurred together in a symphony of threats she had memorized by heart. You think you can leave me? You think anyone else will want you? I'll burn down every place you try to hide. She turned the phone face down and continued her desperate ritual of survival. Concealer, foundation, powder. Each layer another wall between the truth and the world that demanded she smile while serving their meals. The suitcase lay open on her bed like a mouth waiting to swallow the fragments of her life. 3 years of trying to love a man who confused possession with protection had taught her to pack light. Keep what mattered. Leave everything that could be replaced. She folded her server uniforms with mechanical precision, muscle memory guiding hands that refused to stop shaking. Marcus had taken everything else. Her confidence, her friends, the easy laughter that used to spill from her lips without thought or permission. But he hadn't taken her intelligence. And intelligence whispered that tonight was her last chance to disappear before his threats became prophecy. The restaurant would be closing soon. Lotus Garden, the upscale Korean establishment where she had served tables for the past 8 months, owed her a final paycheck. $247 stood between her and a bus ticket to anywhere Marcus couldn't follow. She had researched cities where a black woman could blend into crowds, find work that paid under the table, build a new life from the ashes of this one. For those of you watching from places where starting over feels impossible, you understand the weight of that suitcase, the way hope can feel both heavy and fragile in your hands. Where are you watching from tonight? Does your city feel like sanctuary or cage? Zara closed the suitcase and walked toward the door of her studio apartment for the last time. The hallway smelled of other people's dinners and disappointed dreams. Each step echoed with finality. Lotus Garden occupied a corner of downtown where expensive cars whispered past windows draped in silk and shadow. She had always wondered how the restaurant afforded such prime real estate, how tables stayed full despite prices that made her wealthy customers wince. The owner, Mr. Park, maintained a distance that felt less like professionalism and more like careful calculation. The kitchen staff spoke in rapid Korean, conversations that stopped when she entered, resumed when she left. They treated her with polite kindness that never quite became warmth. She had learned to navigate the undercurrents without understanding their source. Tonight, the restaurant hummed with different energy. Subtle tensions stretched between the servers like wire ready to snap. Mr. Park moved through the dining room with the careful precision of a man checking escape routes. She had seen that look before, in Marcus's eyes when he planned his next move. The hostess, a delicate woman named June, grabbed Zara's wrist as she passed. Her English came in careful, practiced syllables. Important people tonight. Be very careful. Very respectful. Zara nodded and tied her apron with hands that had finally stopped shaking. Work meant focus. Focus meant survival. She could do this for one more night. The dining room stretched before her like a stage set for a play she didn't understand. Crystal glasses caught light from chandeliers that cast everything in golden warmth. Conversations happened in hushed tones, as if the walls themselves demanded reverence. Her section included a corner table where 3 men sat in perfect silence. They wore suits that cost more than her monthly rent, their posture speaking of power that didn't need to announce itself. The one facing the door commanded attention without movement, his presence filling space like smoke. She approached with practiced grace, her smile professionally bright. "Good evening, gentlemen. Can I start you with drinks?" The man at the head of the table looked up, and Zara felt her breath catch in her throat. Jean-Woo Park possessed the kind of brutal beauty that made women forget their own names. Sharp cheekbones carved shadows across a face that belonged in museums, while dark eyes assessed her with the cold efficiency of a predator measuring prey. He spoke in English flavored with precise pronunciation. "Water. Nothing else." His companions ordered beer with movements that suggested they waited for his permission before breathing. The dynamic felt familiar in its wrongness, power wielded through silence and suggestion. Zara brought their drinks with the careful neutrality she had perfected over months of serving customers who saw her as decoration rather than person. The men spoke in Korean, their voices low and urgent. She caught fragments of English. Shipment. Tuesday. Problems with location. Business conversation. Nothing that concerned her. She was refilling water glasses when the front door exploded inward. Marcus stood framed in the entrance like a storm given human form, his 6-foot frame radiating fury that made other customers instinctively lean away. Behind him, 2 friends she recognized from his crew flanked him like soldiers ready for war. The restaurant fell silent. Crystal glasses paused halfway to lips. Even the kitchen noise died. He scanned the room until his gaze found her, and Zara felt ice flood her veins. His smile promised pain with surgical precision. "There's my girl," Marcus called out, his voice carrying across the space like a blade. "Thought you could hide from me in this fancy place?" Zara set the water pitcher down with hands that betrayed nothing of the terror clawing up her throat. "Sir, I'm gonna have to ask you to leave. This is a place of business." Marcus laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut. "Business? This dump?" His eyes swept the dining room with contempt. "What kind of business needs this much security for a bunch of rice eaters?" The insult hit the air like a physical blow. Several customers stood to leave, but Marcus's friends blocked their exit. The situation balanced on a knife's edge. Mr. Park appeared from the back office, his movements careful and controlled. "Gentlemen, we ask that you please leave. You are disturbing our guests." Marcus ignored him, his attention fixed on Zara with laser intensity. "You embarrassed me, baby. Made me look weak in front of my boys. That ain't something I forgive easy." He stepped closer, and Zara backed against the corner table where Jin-Woo Park sat in perfect stillness. The crime boss had not moved, had not spoken, but something in his posture had shifted. The air around him felt charged with potential violence. "I told you what happens when you try to leave me," Marcus continued, his voice dropping to the intimate tone she knew meant maximum danger. "I told you I'd find you. I told you I'd make everyone who helped you pay." The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Other diners pressed against walls, seeking distance from the coming explosion. That's when Jin-Woo Park stood up. The movement was fluid, controlled, carrying the weight of absolute authority. He rose to his full height, not as tall as Marcus but somehow taking up more space, commanding attention through presence rather than noise. "You will leave now." His voice carried the quiet finality of winter settling over the world. Marcus turned toward this new challenge, his lips curling into familiar contempt. "And who the hell are you?" Jin-Woo smiled, and Zara felt her blood freeze. It was not the expression of a man planning to fight. It was the look of a predator who had already decided how to kill. "I am the man telling you to leave." The words fell like stones into still water, rippling outward with implications Zara couldn't fully grasp. Around the restaurant, she noticed details that had escaped her before. The way certain customers sat with their backs to walls. The bulge under Mr. Park's jacket. The fact that every exit was now blocked by men in dark suits who had appeared like ghosts. Marcus, for all his bluster, was not stupid. He looked around the room with new understanding, recognizing the trap he had walked into. "This ain't over," he said to Zara, his voice tight with frustrated rage. "You can't hide forever." Jin-Woo took a single step forward, and Marcus instinctively backed away. "Yes, it is over. Touch her again, and you will discover how permanent over can be." The promise carried absolute conviction. Marcus stared at the stranger who spoke death like other men discussed weather, and for the first time in Zara's memory, he backed down. He left without another word, his friends trailing behind like defeated soldiers. The restaurant remained silent for a full minute after the door closed. Then conversation resumed in careful whispers, as if speaking too loudly might summon back the violence. Zara stood frozen against the corner table, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. This quiet, dangerous man had made Marcus retreat with nothing but words and presence. Jin Woo turned to face her, and she found herself looking into eyes that seemed to see straight through all her carefully constructed defenses. "He will return," he said simply. "Men like that always do." The truth of it settled over her like a shroud. Marcus would regroup, plan, come back with more fury and better strategy. She had seen him do it before to others who had crossed him. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely audible. Jin Woo studied her face with the focused attention of a scholar reading ancient text. He catalogued the fear she couldn't hide, the strength she refused to abandon, the intelligence that sparked behind her terror. "You have nowhere safe to go," he stated with the certainty of someone who understood hunted things. Zara nodded, not trusting her voice. "I can offer protection," he said. "But protection comes with a price." She looked at this dangerous stranger who had just saved her life and wondered if she was about to trade one cage for another. But cages were only prisons if you had better options, and better options had just walked out the door with murder in their eyes. "What kind of price?" she asked. Jin Woo's smile was sharp as winter starlight. "The kind you pay with your trust." The price came with paperwork. Zara sat in the restaurant's back office 30 minutes after Marcus had retreated into the night, watching Jin Woo Park spread documents across Mr. Park's desk with the methodical precision of a surgeon preparing for operation. The older man had introduced himself as Jin Woo's father, though the formal distance between them suggested business partnership more than familial warmth. The contract looked legitimate enough to fool a lawyer. Temporary housing agreement, personal security services, compensation for inconvenience. The language was clinical, sterile, designed to hide the reality of what she was signing. "You understand the terms?" Jin Woo asked, his voice carrying the same controlled calm that had made Marcus flee. Zara read through the pages again, her business degree providing translation for the legal camouflage. Essentially, she would live at his property, follow his security protocols, and accept his protection until the threat to her safety was neutralized. In exchange, she would receive housing, food, and a generous monthly stipend. What the contract didn't mention was the ironclad control hidden in phrases like security protocols and property guidelines. "This says the threat assessment period is indefinite," she pointed out, tapping the relevant clause. "Who determines when I'm safe enough to leave?" Jin Woo's dark eyes met hers across the desk. "I do." The honesty was almost refreshing in its brutality. No pretense of democracy or shared decision-making. Just pure, unvarnished authority. "And if I refuse?" she asked, though they both knew the answer. "Then you walk out that door and hope Marcus is feeling merciful tonight." His voice carried no judgment, just the flat certainty of someone who had seen how these stories ended. Zara thought about her studio apartment, how Marcus had probably already broken down the door and torn through her remaining belongings in search of clues to her destination. She thought about her sister Keisha in Atlanta, how Marcus had already started making calls to mutual acquaintances, hunting for leverage. She thought about the way Jin Woo had faced down 3 armed men with nothing but presence and quiet menace, how Marcus had retreated like a dog shown the whip. "He has connections," she said finally. "Marcus isn't just some angry ex-boyfriend. He moves drugs for people who don't take kindly to interference." Jin Woo's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the quality of his attention. "What kind of people?" "The Santos crew out of East Oakland. They front him product, he manages street distribution. He's been bragging about moving up in their organization." She paused, watching his face for reaction. "If they think you cost them money by protecting me, this becomes bigger than one man's wounded pride." For the first time that evening, Jin Woo smiled with something approaching genuine amusement. "Miss Williams, the Santos crew are children playing with toys they don't understand. Their reach extends exactly as far as their last successful intimidation. Mine extends considerably further." The words carried implications she wasn't sure she wanted to explore. But they also carried the weight of absolute confidence, the assurance of someone who had faced bigger monsters and emerged victorious. She picked up the pen. The compound sat in the hills above the city like a fortress disguised as a mansion. High walls topped with decorative ironwork that couldn't quite hide the security cameras embedded in every angle. The gate responded to Jin Woo's approach with silent efficiency, opening onto a circular drive that led to a structure that managed to be both beautiful and intimidating. Traditional Korean architectural elements blended seamlessly with modern security features. Curved rooflines and elegant stonework surrounded bulletproof windows and reinforced doors. Gardens maintained in perfect symmetry provided both beauty and clear sightlines for surveillance. "This will be your home for the duration of our arrangement," Jin Woo said as they walked toward the entrance. Home. The word carried weight in his mouth, as if he understood the difference between shelter and sanctuary. The interior reflected the same marriage of tradition and protection. Hardwood floors polished to mirror brightness. Artwork that belonged in museums mounted between motion sensors. Beautiful spaces designed by someone who appreciated elegance but never forgot danger. A woman emerged from the kitchen area, elderly but moving with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to managing complex households. She bowed to Jin Woo with deep respect before turning curious eyes toward Zara. "This is Mrs. Kim," Jin Woo explained. "She manages household operations and will help you adjust to our routines. Her English is better than she pretends, but she prefers Korean when possible." Mrs. Kim smiled and spoke in careful, accented English. "Welcome to our home, Miss Williams. I hope you find comfort here." The kindness in her voice caught Zara off guard after the clinical negotiations of the evening. "Thank you. I appreciate your hospitality." Mrs. Kim's smile widened at the politeness, and she gestured toward the staircase. "Your room is prepared. Mr. Park thought you might prefer the east wing for morning light." Zara glanced at Jin Woo, surprised by the consideration. "You asked about my preferences? I observed that you gravitate toward windows when possible. Natural light seemed important to you." His tone suggested such observations were routine business rather than personal interest. The room was larger than her entire apartment, furnished with understated elegance that spoke of serious money. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked gardens that rolled down toward the city lights below. A sitting area with comfortable chairs. A desk positioned to catch morning sun. Artwork that reflected both Korean and American influences. But it was the details that revealed the true nature of her situation. Windows that didn't open. Elegant locks on the inside of the door that would require a key she didn't possess. Beautiful cage, but cage nonetheless. "These are your boundaries," Jin Woo explained, his voice taking on the formal tone of someone reciting established protocol. "The main house, gardens, and pool area are available to you at all times. The east and west wings are off-limits without escort. You will not leave the property without my knowledge and approval. You will not contact anyone outside without clearance through Mrs. Kim or myself." He gestured toward a panel near the door. "Emergency communication system connects directly to security. Press the red button for immediate assistance, blue for Mrs. Kim, green for general requests." "What about work?" she asked. "I have responsibilities." "You are relieved of outside employment for the duration of this arrangement. Your safety takes priority over all other considerations." The reality of her situation settled over her like a weight. Complete dependence. Total isolation from the world she knew. Protection that came at the cost of every freedom she had fought to maintain. But alive was still alive, and alive was more than Marcus had been planning to leave her. "I understand," she said. Jin Woo studied her face with the intensity she was beginning to recognize as habitual. "You're handling this better than most people would. Most people haven't spent 3 years learning to navigate impossible situations with men who confuse control with care." The words slipped out before she could stop them, more honest than wise. Jin Woo went very still, his dark eyes searching her expression with new focus. "Is that what you think I'm doing?" he asked quietly. Zara met his gaze directly, drawing on reserves of courage she had forgotten she possessed. "I think you're a man accustomed to getting what he wants through whatever means necessary. I think you saw someone in trouble and recognized an opportunity that served your interests. I don't know what those interests are yet, but I'm not naive enough to believe this is pure altruism." The honesty hung between them like a challenge. Jean Wu could have responded with anger, with reminders of her complete dependence on his goodwill. Instead, he nodded slowly. Intelligence, he said, as if confirming a diagnosis. Good. Survival requires accurate assessment of power dynamics. He moved toward the door, then paused at the threshold. Mrs. Kim will provide appropriate clothing tomorrow. Your belongings from tonight are being retrieved and will be searched for security purposes before being returned to you. Dinner is served at 7. Breakfast at 8. Lunch when you wish it. And if I prefer to eat in my room? She asked. Then Mrs. Kim will bring your meals here. This arrangement requires your compliance with security measures, not the abandonment of your preferences where possible. The unexpected consideration caught her off guard again. She had braced herself for the rigid control she knew from Marcus, where every choice was a battle and every preference a potential weapon against her. Thank you, she said. Jean Wu paused at the door, his profile sharp against the hallway light. Miss Williams. Yes? Welcome to my protection. He turned to face her fully, and for a moment she glimpsed something beneath the controlled surface. Something that looked almost like loneliness. I hope you find it more comfortable than your alternatives. He left her then, with Mrs. Kim bustling in moments later with towels and questions about dietary restrictions and morning coffee preferences. The older woman's gentle efficiency made the transition feel less like imprisonment and more like an unusual guest arrangement. But as Zara stood at the window looking out over the lights of the city below, she understood the true nature of her bargain. She had traded one cage for another, but this cage came with silk curtains and a guardian who faced down monsters as a matter of routine. Time would tell whether that made her safer or more trapped than before. Outside, the city glittered with promise and danger in equal measure. Somewhere out there, Marcus was planning his next move. But here, surrounded by walls that felt more protective than confining, she found herself breathing freely for the first time in months. The price of protection was surrender of control. But surrender to the right protector might just be the first step toward finding herself again. The third morning brought rain against the windows and the sound of Mrs. Kim humming in the kitchen below. Zara had discovered that the elderly woman rose before dawn to prepare elaborate meals that Jean Wu barely touched, her devotion to perfection evident in every precisely arranged dish. Adaptation came easier than expected. The compound's routines provided structure without the suffocating control she had anticipated. Mrs. Kim consulted her about meal preferences with genuine interest. The security staff nodded respectfully when their paths crossed. Even the gardens seemed designed for solitary walks and quiet contemplation rather than surveillance. But it was the small kindnesses that caught her off guard. Fresh flowers in her room each morning. Books in English that appeared on her nightstand after Mrs. Kim noticed her reading the same paperback repeatedly. A yoga mat placed thoughtfully in the corner after she mentioned missing her exercise routine. Someone was paying attention to details that went far beyond security protocols. She found Mrs. Kim in the kitchen, wrestling with what appeared to be an industrialized bag of rice. The older woman's determination was admirable, but her 5-foot frame was no match for the unwieldy sack. Let me help, Zara offered, moving to lift the other end. Mrs. Kim's face lit up with surprised gratitude. You are very kind, Miss Williams. Most guests prefer to be served. I prefer to be useful, Zara replied, helping maneuver the rice into the storage container. My grandmother always said idle hands make for restless hearts. Mrs. Kim paused in her work, studying Zara's face with new interest. You have wise grandmother. She passed 3 years ago, but her voice still whispers good sense when I need it most. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, Mrs. Kim gradually relaxing into easy conversation as they prepared vegetables for the evening meal. Zara found herself genuinely curious about Korean cooking techniques, asking questions that made Mrs. Kim beam with pleasure at sharing her knowledge. You want to learn Korean cooking? Mrs. Kim asked, hope threading through her voice. I'd love to. I've always believed you understand a culture better when you understand how it feeds itself. Mrs. Kim clapped her hands together with delight. Tomorrow I teach you bulgogi, Mr. Park's favorite dish. The mention of Jean Wu brought a flutter of awareness Zara tried to ignore. She had seen him only briefly over the past 2 days, their interactions limited to polite inquiries about her comfort and formal updates about security measures. But his presence filled the house even when he wasn't visible, an awareness that seemed to follow her from room to room. What was he like as a child? She asked, surprising herself with the question. Mrs. Kim's expression softened with maternal affection. Very serious boy. Always watching, always thinking. Too much responsibility too young. She shook her head sadly. His father needed strong son for business. Jin-woo became strong, but forgot how to be young. The glimpse into his history explained some of the controlled distance, the way he moved through the world like a man who had never been allowed the luxury of carelessness. He seems lonely, Zara observed, then immediately worried she had overstepped. But Mrs. Kim nodded knowingly. Power is cold companion. Makes everything transaction instead of connection. He forgets sometimes that people can care without wanting something in return. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Jin-woo appeared in the kitchen doorway, his usual immaculate suit replaced by dark slacks and a white shirt with sleeves rolled to his forearms. The casual elegance was somehow more devastating than formal armor. Mrs. Kim, he said in Korean, then switched to English when he noticed Zara. I hope I'm not interrupting. Miss Williams helps with dinner preparation, Mrs. Kim announced proudly. She has excellent knife skills and asks intelligent questions about technique. Jin-woo's gaze shifted to Zara, taking in the apron she wore and the vegetables she had been chopping with professional precision. You have restaurant experience beyond serving. I worked prep kitchen for 2 years before moving to front of house. Better tips serving tables, but I enjoyed the cooking more. She gestured to the vegetables arranged before her. There's something meditative about creating order from chaos. An interesting philosophy, he said, moving closer to examine her work. The knife cuts were uniform, professional, demonstrating skill that came from practice rather than casual interest. Mrs. Kim beamed at the implicit praise. I teach her bulgogi tomorrow. She learned very fast. Jin-woo nodded approvingly. Mrs. Kim's bulgogi is exceptional. You're fortunate to learn from a master. The older woman practically glowed under his praise, and Zara found herself charmed by the genuine affection between them. Whatever else Jin-woo Park might be, he inspired loyalty through respect rather than fear. You should join us for the lesson, Zara suggested impulsively. Unless crime bosses don't participate in domestic activities. The words slipped out before she could censor them, too familiar and teasing for their carefully maintained distance. She expected him to retreat behind formal politeness or remind her of appropriate boundaries. Instead, something flickered across his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or amusement. Crime boss? He repeated, his voice carrying the faintest hint of humor. Mrs. Kim giggled nervously, clearly understanding more English than she usually admitted. Zara felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm sorry. That was presumptuous. No, Jin-woo said quietly. It was honest. He paused, considering her invitation. I would be honored to participate in the lesson if Mrs. Kim approves of additional students. Mrs. Kim practically vibrated with excitement. Tomorrow, 4 o'clock, we make feast together. After he left, Mrs. Kim continued humming as she worked, her mood elevated by the unexpected development. But Zara found herself replaying the moment when formality had cracked just enough to reveal the man beneath the armor. The next afternoon brought the promised cooking lesson and an education in subtle dynamics she hadn't anticipated. Jin-woo arrived precisely at 4, having changed into clothes suitable for kitchen work. The sight of him in casual attire, sleeves rolled up and ready to learn, was disarmingly attractive. Mrs. Kim had prepared ingredients with military precision, each component measured and arranged for maximum efficiency. She took obvious pride in teaching her skills, explaining techniques with the patience of someone who genuinely loved sharing knowledge. Bulgogi requires balance, she explained, demonstrating the marinade preparation. Sweet, salty, little bit spicy, like good relationship. She glanced meaningfully between Zara and Jin-woo, her matchmaking intentions barely concealed. The meat must marinate minimum 2 hours, Jin-woo added, his hands moving with surprising competence as he prepared vegetables. Mrs. Kim taught me this recipe when I was 12 years old. You were cooking at 12? Zara asked, charmed by the image of a serious child learning kitchen skills. Mrs. Kim answered before he could. His father believed son should understand all aspects of household management. Jin-woo learned cooking, cleaning, accounting. Everything needed to run proper home. Practical education, Zara observed. My grandmother taught me similar lessons, though her reasoning was that a woman needed to be independent enough to take care of herself. Wise woman, Jin-woo said quietly. Independence is the foundation of all other strengths. They worked together with surprising ease, the kitchen becoming a space where formal boundaries relaxed into something approaching natural interaction. Zara found herself genuinely enjoying Jin-woo's company when he allowed his guard to lower. He possessed dry humor and unexpected gentleness, revealing glimpses of the man he might have been without the weight of responsibility. The moment of connection came when she reached for the soy sauce at the same time he did. Their hands brushed, and the contact sent electricity shooting up her arm. She looked up to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a heartbeat, the careful distance between them evaporated. She saw hunger in his dark eyes that had nothing to do with food and everything to do with the way her lips parted in surprise. Then Mrs. Kim bustled between them with another ingredient, and the moment shattered like glass. But the awareness remained, humming beneath the surface of their continued collaboration like a live wire waiting for the next touch. Later, as they sat down to enjoy the fruits of their labor, Jin-woo surprised her again by actually eating with apparent pleasure rather than his usual mechanical consumption. This is excellent, he said. His praise directed toward Mrs. Kim, but his glance including Zara. You're both skilled teachers and students. Mrs. Kim glowed under the compliment, but Zara found herself studying Jin-woo's face as he ate. There was something almost peaceful about his expression, as if the simple act of sharing a meal had provided respite from whatever burdens he usually carried. You don't eat much normally, she observed. Mrs. Kim works so hard preparing beautiful meals, but you barely touch them. Food is fuel, he replied automatically, then seemed to reconsider. But you're right. Mrs. Kim deserves better appreciation for her efforts. Loneliness, Mrs. Kim said quietly in Korean, then translated for Zara's benefit. Food tastes better when shared with others. Eating alone is survival. Eating together is living. The truth of it settled over the table like a blessing. Jin-woo looked at his plate with new awareness, as if seeing his own isolation reflected in the careful presentation of meals designed for sharing. I forget sometimes, he admitted, his voice carrying unexpected vulnerability. The demands of business create habits that don't serve other aspects of life. What kind of business requires such complete devotion? Zara asked gently. The kind that protects the people I care about, he said, his eyes meeting hers across the table. The kind that ensures threats like your ex-boyfriend understand the consequences of their actions. As if summoned by the mention of Marcus, Jin-woo's phone buzzed against the table. He glanced at the screen and his expression hardened into familiar ice. Excuse me, he said, standing with fluid grace. I need to address this immediately. He answered the call in Korean, his voice taking on the clipped authority she had heard that first night at the restaurant. Even without understanding the words, she could tell the conversation involved threats and responses, the careful choreography of violence conducted at a distance. When he returned to the table, the peaceful man who had shared cooking lessons was gone, replaced by the dangerous protector who had made Marcus flee. Your ex-boyfriend has been making inquiries about your whereabouts, he said without preamble. He's also been spreading word that whoever is protecting you will face consequences for the interference. Fear clawed up Zara's throat, cold and familiar. What kind of consequences? Jin-woo's smile was sharp as winter starlight, the kind he's not equipped to deliver. But his threats indicate escalating desperation, which makes him more dangerous and less predictable. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his, the contact sending warmth shooting through her entire system. You are safe here, Zara. I give you my word. The use of her first name, the warmth of his touch, the absolute conviction in his voice, all combined to create a moment of perfect trust. She believed him completely, and that belief was terrifying in its intensity. "How do you do that?" she whispered. "Do what? Make me feel safe when everything about this situation should terrify me." Jin Woo's thumb traced across her knuckles in a gesture so gentle it made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. Because sometimes the most dangerous place becomes the safest sanctuary. And sometimes the man who frightens the world is the one who protects your peace. The words hung between them like a promise, heavy with implications neither of them was ready to explore fully. But the foundation had been laid, trust building brick by careful brick despite every rational reason for caution. Outside, night was falling over the compound, bringing with it the certainty that Marcus was somewhere in the darkness, planning his next move. But here, in the warm kitchen with the taste of shared success on her tongue and the memory of gentle touch on her skin, Zara found herself hoping that sanctuary might become something more than temporary shelter. It might become home. The call from Keisha came 3 days later, filtered through whatever communication systems Jin Woo used to monitor the outside world. Zara's sister's voice carried the strained brightness of someone trying not to panic. "Zara, baby, where are you? Marcus keeps calling, asking if I've heard from you. He's being real persistent, and you know how he gets when he doesn't get answers." Mrs. Kim delivered the message with gentle efficiency, but Zara caught the worry flickering across her expression. Even without understanding all the implications, the older woman recognized threat when she heard it. "I need to call her back," Zara told Jin Woo that evening as they shared dinner in what had become their unexpected routine. "She's 700 miles away in Atlanta, but Marcus is already using her to get to me." Jin Woo set down his chopsticks with careful precision, his expression shifting into the analytical mask she had learned meant he was processing multiple levels of strategy. "Contact with anyone outside this compound creates security risks. Your sister's phone could be monitored, her location tracked, her movements used as leverage against you. She's all the family I have left," Zara said, her voice rising despite her efforts to remain calm. "I can't just disappear without explanation. She'll think something terrible happened to me." "Something terrible did happen to you," Jin Woo replied quietly. "You were being stalked by a man with violent connections who intended to hurt you. The explanation she deserves is one that keeps her safe from becoming collateral damage." The clinical assessment sparked the first real anger she had felt since arriving at the compound. "You don't get to make that decision for me. Keisha isn't some chess piece in your security game. She's my sister, and she's probably terrified right now." Jin Woo went very still, his dark eyes studying her face with new intensity. "This is how you looked that night at the restaurant," he said slowly. "When you faced down Marcus despite knowing he could hurt you. Anger makes you fearless. Don't change the subject," she snapped, though his observation sent heat through her chest. "This isn't about my courage or lack thereof. This is about basic human decency and the fact that I won't let you isolate me completely from everyone I love." The word love hung between them like a challenge, reminding them both that her feelings weren't limited to gratitude for his protection. Jin Woo was quiet for a long moment, his gaze never leaving her face. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. A real smile, not the controlled expression he used for business or the careful politeness he maintained with strangers. "You're right," he said simply. The admission caught her completely off guard. "I'm sorry, what?" "You're right. Your sister deserves to know you're safe, and you deserve the ability to maintain relationships that matter to you." My approach was unnecessarily controlling. Zara blinked, struggling to process this unexpected reasonableness. She had braced herself for a battle, prepared arguments about autonomy and basic human rights. She hadn't expected him to simply acknowledge her point and concede. However, he continued, his tone shifting back toward business efficiency. "Contact must be managed carefully to protect both of you. Monitored communication system, specific times, limited duration. And she needs to understand that questions about your location or circumstances cannot be answered with specifics." "That's fair," Zara said, still slightly stunned by how easily he had yielded ground. "When can I call her?" "Tomorrow evening. I'll have secure communication established by then. In the meantime, help me understand your sister's situation so we can assess potential risks accurately. They spent the next hour talking about Keisha, and Zara found herself revealing more than she had intended about their shared history. Two sisters raised by their grandmother after their parents died in a car accident. Keisha's marriage to a good man who worked construction and treated her like a queen. The nephew Zara had never met but loved fiercely through photos and video calls. Family means everything to you, Jean Wu observed when she finished. Doesn't it to you? She asked, thinking of his careful relationship with his father and the obvious affection Mrs. Kim held for him. Family in my world is complicated, he said carefully. Blood doesn't always indicate loyalty, and loyalty doesn't always follow blood. I learned early to distinguish between people who claim to care and people who demonstrate it through action. The insight explained some of his careful distance, the way he seemed to test every interaction for hidden agenda or ulterior motive. That sounds lonely, she said softly. Lonely but safe, he replied, though recent experience suggests the two might not be mutually exclusive. Something in his voice made her look up, and she found him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. There was heat there and longing, and something that looked dangerously like hope. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility and the growing awareness that their careful boundaries were becoming increasingly artificial. Then Jean Wu's phone rang, shattering the intimacy with harsh reality. The conversation was brief and conducted in rapid Korean, but she watched his expression harden with each passing second. When he hung up, his face had transformed into the mask of cold efficiency she had learned meant serious danger. What is it? She asked, though she already suspected the answer. Marcus has escalated beyond simple threats. He's been asking questions about your sister's schedule, her husband's work patterns, the school your nephew attends. The information suggests he's planning to use them as leverage to force your location. Ice flooded Zara's veins. He wouldn't hurt a child. Marcus is violent, but he's not. Jean Wu's expression stopped her protest before she could finish. Men like Marcus don't operate by moral boundaries when they feel cornered. He's been publicly humiliated and now faces potential consequences from his own associates for losing you. Desperate people do desperate things. The truth of it hit her like a physical blow. She had been focused on her own safety, but her escape had painted targets on everyone she loved. What do we do? She whispered. We expand the protection, Jean Wu said, his voice taking on the clipped efficiency of command decisions. Your sister and her family will need to be relocated temporarily while we address the threat at its source. You can do that? Arrange protection for people in another state? Jean Wu's smile was sharp as a blade. Miss Williams, my reach extends considerably further than one city or one state. Your family will be safe within 24 hours. The casual display of power should have intimidated her. Instead, she found herself grateful beyond words for the resources he could bring to bear on her behalf. Thank you, she said, the words carrying weight of everything she couldn't express. Thank me when this is over, he replied. Right now, I need to make arrangements and coordinate response. Can you handle the initial contact with your sister to prepare her for what's coming? She nodded, though the prospect of explaining the situation terrified her almost as much as the danger itself. They worked late into the night, Jean Wu making calls in multiple languages while Zara helped coordinate logistics with a competence that seemed to surprise him. Her business background proved useful in organizing the complex details of relocating an entire family on short notice. You have excellent instincts for operational planning, he observed as they reviewed security protocols for Keisha's protection. I spent 2 years managing restaurant operations before Marcus convinced me to quit, she replied. Crisis management was part of the job description. Jean Wu looked up from the papers spread between them, studying her face with new interest. He convinced you to quit? Said he didn't like other men looking at me when I was in professional settings. Said it made him feel disrespected when I had opinions about business decisions. The familiar shame crept into her voice. I was stupid enough to think it meant he loved me too much to share me. Isolation tactics, Jean Wu said quietly. Classic pattern for men who confuse control with affection. He wanted you dependent and grateful rather than independent and confident. The clinical assessment stung because it was accurate, but his matter-of-fact tone carried no judgment, only recognition of familiar patterns. "How do you know so much about emotional manipulation?" she asked. "Because I've seen what it does to people," he said, his voice carrying unexpected gentleness. "And because I've had to learn the difference between protection that preserves autonomy and control that destroys it." The distinction seemed important to him, as if he had wrestled with the balance between his nature and his responsibilities. "Is that why you gave in so easily when I challenged you about calling Keisha? Because you didn't want to repeat his patterns?" Jin-woo was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face. "Partly," he admitted finally, "but mostly because watching you fight for what matters to you reminded me why I wanted to protect you in the first place. Your strength is what makes you worth protecting, not something to be managed or diminished." The words hit her like a revelation, reframing everything about their dynamic in a single moment of clarity. He wasn't trying to control her the way Marcus had. He was trying to create a safe space where her strength could flourish rather than simply survive. "You're not what I expected," she said softly. "What did you expect? Someone like Marcus, but with better resources and more sophisticated methods. Someone who would want to break me down and build me back up in his image." Jin-woo's expression darkened at the comparison. "I have seen enough broken things in my life to know that destruction is easy and repair is precious. Breaking you would be like burning down a work of art to warm my hands." The poetic intensity of his response caught her off guard, revealing depths of feeling he usually kept hidden beneath business efficiency. They finished their planning in comfortable silence, working together with the easy coordination of people who understood each other's rhythms and strengths. But underneath the practical collaboration, awareness hummed between them like electricity, building toward something that felt both inevitable and terrifying. When they finally called it a night, Jin-woo walked her to her room with the careful courtesy that had become routine. But at her door, he paused, his hand resting against the frame as he studied her face in the hallway's soft light. "Thank you for trusting me with your family's safety," he said quietly. "Thank you for making my trust worth something," she replied. For a moment, the careful distance between them wavered. She could see the hunger in his dark eyes, the longing that matched her own growing attraction. It would be so easy to close the space between them, to discover if his mouth was as gentle as his hands had been. Instead, he stepped back, maintaining the boundaries they had both agreed were necessary. "Good night, Zara." "Good night, Jin-woo." But as she closed her door, she caught a glimpse of him standing motionless in the hallway, his hands clenched at his sides as if fighting his own impulses. Change was coming. She could feel it in the air like the pressure before a storm. The careful balance they had maintained was shifting, driven by trust and attraction and the growing certainty that protection had evolved into something far more complex and dangerous than either of them had anticipated. Tomorrow would bring her sister's voice and the comfort of family connection. But tonight brought the awareness that she was falling for the man who had saved her life, and that falling might be the most dangerous thing she had ever done. The attack came at dawn, when the world balanced between darkness and light and even predators might be caught sleeping. Zara woke to the sound of glass breaking somewhere in the compound, followed by Mrs. Kim's sharp cry of alarm from downstairs. The emergency panel beside her bed blazed red, bathing the room in crimson warning as sirens began their mechanical scream. She pressed the red button as Jin-woo had instructed, then moved to the window despite every instinct screaming at her to hide. Through the bulletproof glass, she could see dark figures scaling the garden walls with military precision. Too many of them, too well equipped, too coordinated for a simple revenge plot. Her door burst open without ceremony. Jin-woo strode in wearing tactical gear that transformed him from elegant businessman into lethal weapon. His face carried the cold focus she had glimpsed that first night at the restaurant, but magnified into something that made her breath catch with its intensity. "Stay away from the windows," he commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. "We have multiple breach points and at least 12 hostiles. This is not random violence." Zara's mind raced through the implications. 12 men? Marcus doesn't have those kinds of resources. Jean Wu's expression darkened with grim satisfaction. No, but the Petrov Syndicate does. Your ex-boyfriend sold information about our protection arrangement to people who see interference in their territory as declaration of war. The pieces clicked together with terrifying clarity. Marcus had escalated beyond personal revenge into something that threatened Jean Wu's entire operation. She had become the catalyst for a conflict that could destroy everything. "This is my fault," she whispered, horror flooding through her system. "No." Jean Wu's voice cut through her panic like a blade. "This is the inevitable result of weak men making alliances with dangerous ones. Marcus chose to involve people he couldn't control. The consequences are his responsibility." Gunfire erupted from somewhere below them, sharp cracks that made Zara flinch despite the building's reinforced construction. Jean Wu spoke rapidly into his radio in Korean, coordinating response with the calm efficiency of someone who had faced similar situations before. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, pushing down fear in favor of action. Jean Wu paused in his tactical assessment to stare at her. Most people would be demanding escape routes or hiding places. Most people haven't spent 3 years learning that panic makes you stupid and action keeps you alive, she replied. "You taught me your emergency systems for a reason. How can I help?" Something shifted in his expression, recognition and approval combining with an emotion too intense to name. "There's a secure communication center in the basement. Mrs. Kim knows the location. I need you to coordinate with her to monitor security feeds and relay information to my teams." He handed her a radio and a weapon that felt heavier than expected in her hands. "The safety is here. Point and squeeze if anyone gets past our perimeter who isn't wearing our identification. Do not hesitate. Do not give warnings. Anyone who breaches this house intends to kill you." The weight of the gun in her palms felt like accepting responsibility for her own survival in the most literal sense possible. "I understand." Jean Wu cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the urgency of their situation. His dark eyes searched her expression with desperate intensity, as if memorizing every detail. "If something happens to me, Mrs. Kim knows the evacuation procedures. There are people who will protect you, places you can go where even the Petrovs can't reach." "Nothing is going to happen to you," Zara said with fierce conviction. "You don't get to protect me from Marcus just to die defending me from his stupidity." Jean Wu's thumb traced across her cheekbone with devastating tenderness. "You make me want to live through this more than I've wanted anything in years." The confession hung between them like a promise and a prayer. Then he was gone, moving toward the sound of battle with predatory grace that made her understand exactly how dangerous he could be when protecting what mattered to him. She found Mrs. Kim in the basement communication center, the older woman's usual gentle demeanor replaced by steely competence as she monitored multiple security feeds simultaneously. The transformation was startling, revealing depths of capability Zara had never suspected. 12 men entered through 3 breach points. Mrs. Kim reported in crisp English that carried no trace of her usual accent. "Jean Wu's team has neutralized 4, but they're using professional tactics and equipment. This is not street-level conflict." Zara settled beside her, studying the monitors with growing understanding of the compound's defensive systems. The screens showed Jean Wu moving through his own territory like an apex predator, his team coordinating with lethal efficiency to eliminate threats with surgical precision. But the attackers weren't random criminals. They moved with military training, used communication discipline, employed covering fire and tactical positioning that spoke of serious professional background. "They're not here just to take me," she realized with growing horror. "They're here to destroy everything you've built." Mrs. Kim nodded grimly. Jean Wu knew this was possibility when he chose to protect you. He calculated the risk and decided you were worth it. The weight of that decision settled over Zara like a crushing burden. All of this destruction, all of this danger, because she had been too weak to handle Marcus on her own. "No," Mrs. Kim said sharply, somehow reading her thoughts. "You think like victim instead of survivor. Jean Wu chose to fight these men because fighting bullies is what strong people do. You gave him reason to remember what strength should protect." On the monitors, the battle raged with controlled violence that looked more like choreographed dance than chaotic struggle. Jinwoo appeared and disappeared through rooms and corridors, each appearance marking the elimination of another threat. But even lethal efficiency had limits. More attackers kept coming, and his team was being stretched beyond their defensive perimeter. They have backup forces, Zara observed, watching additional figures appear on the exterior cameras. This was planned as siege warfare, not quick strike. Mrs. Kim's hands flew over communication equipment, relaying tactical information to Jinwoo's team with precision that spoke of extensive training. But worry etched lines around her eyes as she tracked the overwhelming numbers. East perimeter is compromised, she reported into her headset. Multiple hostiles advancing toward main house. That's when Zara made the decision that would change everything. She grabbed the radio Jinwoo had given her and spoke with calm authority. All teams, this is base communication. I'm implementing Protocol 7. Mrs. Kim stared at her in shock. Protocol 7 was complete lockdown with automated defense systems activation. It would seal the main house and turn the building itself into a weapon, but it would also trap anyone inside until the threat was completely eliminated. You cannot, Mrs. Kim protested. Jinwoo is still outside perimeter. Then we give him reason to get inside quickly, Zara replied, keying the radio again. Jinwoo, you have 60 seconds to reach safe zone before defensive systems activate. Use the window. His voice crackled back through static, tight with controlled urgency. Negative. Too many hostiles between current position and entry point. Then I'm creating you an entry point, she said, studying the monitor displays with tactical focus she hadn't known she possessed. Mrs. Kim, can you control the electrical systems from here? Mrs. Kim nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. Cut power to the east wing in 30 seconds. Restore it in 10-second intervals. Anyone with night vision equipment will be blinded by the cycling, but Jinwoo knows this building well enough to navigate in darkness. It was desperate improvisation, but desperation bred innovation when survival was at stake. The plan worked with terrifying efficiency. The power cycling created chaos among the attackers while Jinwoo used intimate knowledge of his own territory to reach the main house. He arrived through the kitchen entrance with blood on his clothes that wasn't his own and fury in his eyes that promised complete destruction for anyone who threatened his people. Status report, he demanded, stripping off tactical gear with movements that spoke of controlled violence barely restrained. Perimeter secured through automated defenses, Zara reported. Hostile forces neutralized or retreating. Casualties? 2 of mine wounded, none critical. All hostiles either eliminated or fled. But this was coordinated assault with professional backing. The Petrovs wanted to send a message about respecting territorial boundaries. His dark eyes found hers across the communication center, and something in his expression made her breath catch. There was gratitude there, and pride, but underneath burned something far more dangerous and consuming. You implemented tactical response under fire with no training and no experience, he said quietly. You saved lives tonight, including my own. I had good teachers, she replied, thinking of Mrs. Kim's steady competence and his own calm instructions. Jinwoo moved closer, and she could see the adrenaline still coursing through his system, the way his hands trembled slightly with the aftermath of violence. But when he reached for her, his touch was infinitely gentle. When I heard your voice on the radio, when I realized you were coordinating defensive response instead of hiding in terror, I understood something that terrifies me more than any enemy I've ever faced. What? She whispered, though her heart already knew the answer. That I love you, he said, the words falling like stones into still water. Not because you need my protection, but because you make my protection worth something. Not because you're helpless, but because you're strong enough to stand beside me in the darkness and help light the way through. The confession hit her like physical force, reordering everything she thought she understood about their relationship. This wasn't gratitude or possessiveness or the complicated psychology of rescue and dependence. This was love, raw and honest and absolutely terrifying in its intensity. I love you too, she said, the words feeling like the most dangerous thing she had ever admitted. I love your strength and your gentleness and the way you make the impossible feel possible. I love that you're deadly to everyone except the people you protect. I love that you saw me as worth saving when I didn't even know I was worth anything. Jin-woo cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing across her cheekbones with reverent care. In my world, love is luxury few people can afford. It creates vulnerability that enemies exploit and weakness that destroys the people you're trying to protect. And now? She asked. Now I understand that some things are worth any risk, he said, leaning down until their foreheads touched. You make me want to be strong enough to love you and protect you and still survive whatever comes next. The kiss that followed tasted of desperation and relief, and the metallic edge of violence narrowly escaped. But underneath the urgency was something infinitely tender, the careful reverence of two people who had found something precious in the midst of chaos. When they finally broke apart, Mrs. Kim was smiling through tears, her maternal heart clearly satisfied by developments she had been orchestrating from the moment Zara entered their household. Outside, dawn was breaking over the compound, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that promised new beginnings. The threat that had brought them together was finally, completely neutralized. But the love that had grown from protection and trust and shared danger was just beginning, fragile and fierce and worth every risk they had taken to find it. Marcus was gone, eliminated along with his allies in the systematic way that dangerous men dealt with people who threatened their families. And family, Zara realized with stunning clarity, was exactly what she had found in this beautiful, deadly sanctuary. Home wasn't a place. It was the people who would fight for you, die for you, and love you despite every danger that came with claiming you. Jin-woo had given her sanctuary, but she had given him something equally valuable in return. She had given him a reason to come home. 3 weeks after the attack, Jin-woo presented her with papers that looked nothing like the contract that had bound her to his protection. The dissolution agreement was simple, elegant, and absolute. No obligations, no restrictions, no conditions that would require her to remain under his authority or within his world. She was free to leave, free to start over anywhere she chose, with enough financial support to build whatever life she wanted far from the violence that had brought them together. He placed the documents on the desk in his study and stepped back, giving her space to read without the pressure of his presence. The morning light streaming through tall windows caught the gold in his dark hair, and she found herself memorizing the way he looked in this moment when he offered her complete freedom. You don't have to decide immediately, he said quietly. Take whatever time you need to consider your options. Zara read through the legal language that formally ended their arrangement, each clause releasing her from any obligation to remain in his dangerous world. It was generous beyond anything she had expected, ensuring her safety and independence with the thoroughness that characterized everything Jin-woo did. What happens if I sign this? She asked, though her heart already knew her answer. You walk away from here with enough resources to disappear completely if you choose. New identity, clean background, financial security. You can go to college, start a business, live anywhere in the world without looking over your shoulder. His voice remained carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in the line of his shoulders, the way his hands remained perfectly still against his sides. And what happens if I don't sign? Then we negotiate a new arrangement, he said, meeting her gaze directly. One between equals rather than protector and protected. One based on choice rather than necessity. The distinction mattered more than she could express. Everything between them up to this point had been shadowed by her complete dependence on his goodwill. Any feelings that had developed could be questioned, attributed to gratitude or Stockholm Syndrome or the desperate psychology of captivity. This offer changed everything. It made whatever came next authentic, chosen, real. What would a new arrangement look like? She asked. Partnership, he said simply, in every sense of the word. You would be my equal in all decisions that affect our shared life. Your intelligence and strength would be valued assets rather than complications to manage. Your voice would carry weight in my world because my world would become our world. The vision he painted was seductive and terrifying in equal measure. Life beside a man who commanded empires and faced down enemies as a matter of routine. Luxury and danger intertwined in ways that would challenge her to grow beyond anything she had imagined possible. but also love. Real, honest, devastating love with someone who had seen her at her weakest and chosen to help her become stronger. I need to understand something first, she said, setting the papers aside. When you look at me now, do you see someone you saved? Someone who owes you a debt that can never be repaid? Or do you see a woman you want beside you because of who she is, not what you did for her? Jin-woo was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face with the intensity that had become familiar and precious to her. I see the woman who coordinated tactical response under fire when trained soldiers might have panicked, he said finally. I see intelligence that complements my own and strength that makes me stronger rather than weaker. I see someone who challenges my decisions when she thinks I'm wrong and supports them when she believes I'm right. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the vulnerability he usually kept hidden beneath controlled composure. I see the woman I love, not because I saved her, but because she saved herself and chose to let me help. I see my partner, my equal, the other half of something I didn't know I was missing until I found it. The words hit her like revelation, reframing their entire relationship in a way that made her heart race with possibility. I don't want to leave, she said, the admission feeling like stepping off a cliff into free fall. I want to stay, but not as your protected responsibility. I want to stay as your chosen partner in whatever comes next. Jin-woo's smile transformed his entire face, revealing joy so pure it made her breath catch. Relief and love and something that looked like wonder combined in an expression she would remember for the rest of her life. Then we have something much more important than dissolution papers to discuss, he said, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. The ring inside was stunning in its understated elegance. Not the flashy display of wealth she might have expected, but something that spoke of careful thought and perfect taste. Platinum bands set with diamonds and sapphires arranged in a pattern that somehow managed to honor both traditional elegance and contemporary design. Zara Williams, he said, dropping to one knee with fluid grace that spoke of absolute certainty rather than nervous proposal. Will you marry me not because I can protect you, but because we protect each other? Will you choose to build a life with me because we're stronger together than apart? The proposal was everything she hadn't known she wanted. Not flowery romance or desperate pleading, but honest recognition of what they had become, an invitation to make it permanent. Yes, she said, laughing through tears she hadn't realized were falling. Yes, because I love you. Yes, because you're right that we're stronger together. Yes, because I want to see what impossible things we can accomplish when we stop being careful and start being fearless. The ring fit perfectly, as if he had somehow known her measurements by heart. But then, Jin-woo noticed everything about the people he cared about, cataloged details with the same precision he brought to business strategy. Mrs. Kim appeared in the doorway as if summoned by engagement radar, her face bright with maternal satisfaction and eyes suspiciously damp with happy tears. I prepare celebration dinner, she announced in English that carried no trace of her usual accent. Finally, this house has proper family. The word family resonated through Zara's chest like a bell, settling into places that had been hollow for longer than she cared to remember. This was what she had been searching for without knowing it. Not just love, but belonging. Not just safety, but home. The weeks that followed blurred together in a whirlwind of planning that revealed just how extensive Jin-woo's resources really were. Wedding arrangements that honored both Korean traditions and American preferences. Legal procedures that seamlessly integrated her into his world while preserving her identity. Security measures that would protect them both without imprisoning either of them. But it was the quiet moments that mattered most. Cooking lessons with Mrs. Kim that became cultural education and surrogate family bonding. Evening walks through the garden where they planned their future with the careful attention to detail that characterized everything Jin-woo touched. Conversations that ranged from business strategy to childhood memories to dreams neither of them had dared voice before finding each other. Keisha and her family arrived from Atlanta for the wedding, relocated permanently to a house Jin-woo had purchased in a safe neighborhood where Marcus's ghost couldn't reach them. Watching her sister embrace Mrs. Kim like long-lost family, and seeing her nephew toddle fearlessly into Jin-woo's arms proved that some bonds transcended culture and circumstance. The wedding itself took place in the compound's gardens, transformed into something that looked like a fairy tale painted in reality. Traditional Korean ceremonies blended seamlessly with American traditions, creating something unique that belonged entirely to them. When Jin-woo lifted her veil and spoke his vows in Korean before repeating them in English, Zara understood that she wasn't just gaining a husband. She was joining a family, entering a world, becoming part of something larger and more complex than simple romance. "I promise to protect your strength rather than shelter your weakness," he said, his voice carrying across the assembled guests with absolute conviction. "I promise to stand beside you rather than in front of you, to value your voice rather than silence your opinions, to love your courage rather than fear your independence." Zara's vows were equally honest, acknowledging the unique nature of their relationship and the man she had chosen to love. "I promise to trust your protection without losing my own power, to support your strength without diminishing my own, to choose you every day not because I need you, but because I want you. I promise to make our dangerous love the safest sanctuary either of us has ever known." When they kissed to seal their marriage, the compound's dangerous beauty seemed to shimmer with promise. This place that had begun as prison had become paradise, not through denial of its lethal capabilities but through acceptance that love could flourish in the most unlikely gardens. The reception continued late into the evening, filled with laughter and music and the kind of joy that comes from watching two people find something precious against impossible odds. Mrs. Kim cried openly through 3 speeches and pressed family recipes into Zara's hands like heirlooms. Jin-woo's security team, revealed to be much more like family than employees, offered toasts that spoke of genuine affection rather than professional obligation. But it was the moment when they finally retreated to their shared room, officially husband and wife, that felt like true beginning rather than ending. Jin-woo had moved his belongings into the space that had been hers alone, creating something that belonged to both of them without erasing either of their individual identities. Korean art alongside American books. Traditional furniture balanced with contemporary comfort. A space that honored both their backgrounds while creating something entirely new. "No more separate worlds," he said, pulling her into his arms with gentle reverence. "From tonight forward, everything I am belongs to you as much as it belongs to me." "And everything I am belongs to you," she replied, understanding that surrender to the right person was actually the ultimate expression of strength. Their love that night was tender and fierce and absolutely perfect, the physical expression of emotional truths they had been discovering for months. But afterward, as they lay wrapped in each other's arms with moonlight painting silver patterns across their intertwined bodies, it was the conversation that sealed their future completely. "Do you ever regret it?" Jin-woo asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her skin. "Choosing this life instead of the fresh start you could have had?" Zara considered the question seriously, thinking about the woman who had fled her apartment in terror just months ago. That woman had been running from one cage, not knowing she would find sanctuary in the arms of the most dangerous man she had ever met. "Never," she said with absolute certainty. "That fresh start would have been about survival. This is about living. There's a difference." She felt his smile against her hair, warm and satisfied and full of promise for everything they would build together. "What about you?" she asked. "Any regrets about choosing love over the simplicity of solitude?" Jin-woo was quiet for a moment, his arms tightening around her as if ensuring she was real and permanent and his. "My only regret is that it took me 32 years to understand that strength shared is stronger than strength hoarded. That protection offered is more powerful than power wielded alone." They fell asleep wrapped together like pieces of the same puzzle, finally finding their perfect fit, hearts beating in synchrony that spoke of deep recognition and permanent claiming. For those of you who believe in love that conquers impossible odds, who understand that sometimes the most dangerous choice leads to the safest harbor, you know that some stories end exactly where they're supposed to begin. Share with us in the comments how love has transformed your own life, because every sanctuary story deserves to be celebrated. Months later, as Zara stood in their kitchen teaching Mrs. Kim's granddaughter the bulgogi recipe that had become family tradition, she reflected on the strange alchemy that had transformed captivity into partnership, protection into devotion, and fear into fearless love. Through the window, She could see Jean Woo in the garden with Keisha's son, patiently teaching him Korean words, while they tended flowers that bloomed impossibly beautiful in soil that had once known only thorns. This was what happiness looked like when built on bedrock of trust rather than foundation of need. This was what love became when chosen by two strong people who decided they were stronger together than apart. Jean Woo looked up from the garden and met her gaze through the glass, his smile carrying all the warmth and promise and absolute certainty that had made her believe in impossible things. She had fled one man's cage only to discover that the right man's protection felt exactly like freedom. And in that freedom they had built something more precious than safety, more valuable than security, more lasting than any fortress. They had built home.